Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's Lotus, Art of Sacred Embodiment here. Thanks for being here. Nice to be connecting with you. So today I want to talk about initiation again. And if you've liked the topic so far, then thanks for subscribing. I appreciate that. And I'm happy if you're finding them supportive. So I talked last week about the initiation process of surrender that usually comes with the water element. Today I want to talk about the initiation of fire. And these are both topics that we're covering in the elemental alchemy journey. It's a 5-week journey that we've been doing. We're coming up on to week 4 on Earth. So we've gone through air and water and fire, and now we're coming into Earth this weekend, and then we're going to be in space. So working with the elements, I have found to be a really powerful, magical way of templating and working with the living forces of nature, right? Working with the living forces that compose all of life. And when we're working with these 5 elements, we get to come up close and personal. We get to tease them apart and understand what are their qualities. What are their properties? What is their spiritual nature? What is their emotional nature? How are the elements always expressing as a part of our being? How do they express through our physiology and biology? How do they express through our mental processes? How do they express through the way that we physically live in our body? How are they intrinsic in our spiritual awakening and evolutionary process? So I'm talking to you today about the initiation of fire in the midst of, I had a really hard time trying to figure out the lighting because I don't know if you can see, I'm almost kind of blinded by the light outside. We've got many inches of snow. I don't know how many. It's quite beautiful, and yet it's really bright. The sun is out today. It was not yesterday, so it was a little easier, but it's really bright, and yeah, it's like right there, and it's like, all right, to get the light right, I had to be right here in front of my closet, my external closet, my second closet. But yeah, it's very bright, and it's very white. And so I want to just touch on that, right? On the crystallization of water and the geometries of snow. So I'm sure that you've seen some of those amazing pictures of snowflakes and how all the snowflakes are very unique. They have their own geometry, their own expression. And so when I look out there, I see all of this white, and yet I realize that on a deeper, more subtle level, there's a myriad of encodements of life. And yesterday, while it was snowing, we got to experience the whole gamut, right? Of a little bit of sleet, a little bit of ice, big snowflakes, dry, fluffy snowflakes, wet snowflakes. But I was enjoying how the element of water was shape-shifting like the entire day, and really just recognizing that that's what was happening. It was changing its form. It was changing its own water elemental composition based on temperature, based on the wind, based on all of these things that I don't really know. and yet within it, it has its own intelligence. So snow is the symbol of purity. And it always denotes spiritual presence. And when it shows up in dreams, when we're walking in it, you know, it's got its own, like the light is really powerful. The night sky, when we have snow, it's like the snow completely, just like the moon, has a way of illuminating everything. And that's really what spirituality does, right? It illuminates deeper and higher truths. And it goes through those truths from the gross level to the highest subtle levels. And they're all the realms and the expressions of the divine, of the universe, of life with the capital L. However we want to come into relationship or call that. And in this course, we've been working with as well the spiritual names of the elements when they have been elevated into their higher consciousness, rather than just the biological elemental function. Just like Kundalini has a biological Kundalini, but we also have the spiritual Kundalini. And when that is activated, then that consciousness, that wisdom knows exactly how to awaken our entire being and expand our consciousness and eventually bring us back home to divine source. So I just wanted to share that, right? That like looking outside, and for those of you doing the journey, most of you, well, not all, but many of you are here locally, so you're kind of watching these expressions of the water element while you're in the while we're in the fire, just as so it's cooling our fire, right? So let's talk a little bit about the initiation of fire. The initiation of water we did before, and that is an initiation mostly of surrender. We are drawn, we are nudged, we are called to let go and surrender through a very emotional and maybe even we talked about like the heaviness, the depression that can come as an initiation through water. Fire is going to be very different, right? Because fire is an activating and it's a hot element. So initiation by fire is going to demand of us a whole new kind of resiliency, a whole new kind of being forged, right? So it's a very active process of being forged through levels of prolonged intensity. So it's probably the easiest way to say that. Levels of prolonged intensity that require us to have a deep reserve, hopefully, of fortitude and resilience and focus and the ability to hold a lot of light. And when I say light, in part I mean the light of the fire that burns very bright in order to do its work of purification. So while water is a feminine path of surrender, of initiation, and like we mentioned then, any initiation is going to be challenging. It's its nature. It wants to break down what has been, what is no longer meant to be. And in that breaking down, in whatever method is being used by life, by our soul, it's going to require us to let go and purify on deep levels. Our emotions, our body, our thought forms, our beliefs, our consciousness. And therein be able to expand into a whole different level of perception and understanding and paradigm and embodiment. So when we're working with fire, there is, it's more of a masculine force. And yet there are many feminine fiery forces that support this process within, especially like the Hindu and the yogic teachings, right? We've got the inner dark goddesses, and what they do is they use, they're wrathful, but their wrath is based on this deep, deep love for truth. So when we're working with the fire, when something is going on in our life we're just feeling like we are being raked over the coals, right? That's an expression that we know we're in the fire. Or when things are just hard, they're painful, they feel dramatic, right? They feel like I want to get off this train and I can't. Right? So there's this motion that we feel like we keep having to go through something that we'd rather not, but we have to. We're compelled to, we're propelled to. And so it brings about this pressure of heat. And it's this heat, this inner heat, or sometimes outer heat, depending on what is it you're working with, right? Depending on situation, environment, people in the environment, what are the personalities, all of that. We feel that level of intensity that almost feels too much to bear. And the key to this is knowing that yes, there is a driving force. But if we can begin to recognize and to inquire within, what is it that I'm trying to hold on to, that I'm clinging to, that I'm refusing to give up, that I'm in self-will run riot, right? What is it that I'm wanting to be different and it's not? I cannot make it different. And how do I then surrender and let go into that? That doesn't mean that we're not going to be out of the fire, but the fire might actually not be raging as much. Because part of what the fire is there to do is to make us get out of self-will. It is to make us let go of our own inner need to control and create an outcome in the way that I wanted. Control things and need them to be in how I perceive they should be. Whenever we're going through a transformation or a spiritual crisis, we are being demanded sometimes that your way is not the way. You've got to let go and you've got to open up to something completely different that is going to come from whatever your perspective is that you're holding. Does not mean that we're wrong. It does not mean that there isn't a right and true for what it is that's going on, but perhaps it is the way in which we're going about it. It is the energy that we also are bringing. to the table. So I can say from personal experience, I used to be much more willful, but there have been those really tough fires that I've had to walk through. And I think in the beginning I didn't recognize them as initiations. I didn't understand that I was actually on a soul and spiritual level being called forth to enter a new stage of my own development, of my own evolution. And I'll just share, probably like one of my very first, like the really, really tough one, I think, because I had enough awareness at that time to navigate things from a healthy way, and yet I still had enough, karmic connection to the situation and my own, wounding and shadow that still, it was not going to let go. I could not stay where I was. So I was in a relationship for 5 years. It was a very challenging relationship that was like in my mid 20s. My mid to late 20s. And it was a the relationship itself was an initiation, and I had no idea of that term at that time. It was a very dark phase for me, and I kept leaving the relationship because I knew that it was not where I was supposed to be. But it was a highly charged karmic relationship. So I'm sure many of you are going to kind of recognize this scenario. We were back and forth, right? So we were together 5 years. I left 4 times, trying to break the cycle. However, the karmic lessons that needed to be learned, my shadow that needed to continue to purify, was what I was still working through. So finally, after that 4th time, and then I went back, and I was in therapy at the time, and my therapist, it really rubbed me wrong at the time of this. I was getting ready to leave again. So she asked me, what would happen if you didn't leave this time? What if you stayed and really, really got down to what is it that keeps bringing you back? By healing, right? Healing this wound, healing this karma that the two of us were both equally enmeshed in. And I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, I need out. And she said, but you've already done that. And something keeps bringing you back. So if you stay, you'll get more awareness and clarity. Now, I want to say when I'm saying this does not go really in what I'm saying. I'm not like condoning violence, abuse, any of that. And everybody has to like really navigate serious situations, right, on their own and with support. So for me, this was something that I knew that she was right and I had to do. And so I stayed for another year, almost maybe a year and a half. In that year and a half, I stayed in the fire of what I needed to change, what I needed to transform in me within that relationship. I needed to let go of the ways in which I tried to control, and I wanted him to be different. I wanted things to be different. I wanted behaviors to be different. I had to keep letting go and then sit with what happens in me when these things don't go away. Right? And I was able to really allow my shadow to burn away, to purify. I was able to purify within the situation by taking my attention off of my partner and what was going on in the relationship and come back to me. I had to ask some of those questions like, well, what drew me here to begin with? What and why was this a good fit? And why was it a good fit for my healing? What in me was the same as what was in my partner? That didn't feel good. So eventually, the last 3 months of the relationship, we lived in separate rooms. We didn't hardly talk at all. And I was still kind of working through my attachments, my things that I was still judging. He was doing his part of whatever his thing was. But ultimately, there came the moment, once I had really become more neutral than angry or feeling victimized or feeling unloved or feeling unheard or feeling disrespected, all of those things. I had pretty much healed those. They weren't true to me anymore. And I recognized more and more that this just was not a good match. That our morals and our values were vastly different. That an apple could not be a banana, and vice versa. And so it got easier and easier and easier until the day came where that last, it was sort of like I consciously did this. I consciously threw out a last test with the knowing that if this boundary was still not going to be respected, then I was done. Because I had healed by staying through the fire, right? My lead had been turned into gold inside of me. And that was the moment that I realized that this relationship was what was going to put me on my spiritual path. I don't even know at that time how that made sense to me, but I wrote it in my journal. So, and then when I left, I was free. I never desired to go back. I knew that that was the last place that I wanted to go. I knew that it was a toxic place. Whereas before, I kept trying to, make it not toxic. But the truth was, it was toxic. And I was part of the toxicity. And so that walking through that 1.5 years, steadfastly, of forging my way and becoming conscious in the process. This is what's true for me. This is what's not working. This is my own darkness. This is my own shadow. And then healing that and healing that. Resolving it and letting him go. Letting him go. Wasn't his fault. It is, but it wasn't, right? Like certain things were, but they weren't. This person is just being that person. I am just being me. And guess what? These two things are like their own bonfire together. So that's just kind of an example, like a very lived example that I think many in relationships can attest to. This kind of dynamic, right? This kind of karmic relationship that really is just there to bring us new levels of healing, not necessarily there to put roots down in. So when we're working with fire, we want to be really aware of how we are fighting inside of us for something else, right? Water, we just kind of surrender. We sort of let go because we don't have any fight left. When we're in fire, part of the fire is generated by our own inner fight. So that letting go is forced through that element, through reflecting back and squeezing us right through, like, yeah, that burning sensation of, oh my gosh, this is so painful. And yet when we break free from one chunk of the lead moves into one piece of gold, we're like, whoom, okay, I see now. And then we can start letting go. And then we can start letting that fire still work with us. And we're working with the fire because we're listening, we're watching, we're being mindful, we're consciously choosing along the way. Both of these initiations, most of the time, life is going to introduce us to one or the other, whether you're on a path or not, right? Sometimes these are midlife crises. Sometimes these are spiritual crises. Sometimes these are just when our world kind of turns upside down based on circumstances. But the key is going to be the letting go, the surrender. They're both about surrendering and letting go into something that is much wiser, stronger, loving, and supportive, that wants to hold us, but we have to be willing to be held and be guided by these wisdoms that create life and a myriad of expressions of life. So I hope that settles in someplace, and that you can relate to this in your life. And I'm going to put the water link here too, because you might be more prone to experiencing one or the other, or you might have been in one phase that you may not have even known was initiatory in one expression, and now that you're on your awakening journey, you recognize that your initiations show up in a different way. And the more conscious we are, the more kind of fun, I'm using that word lightly, and exciting they can be to work with, because it's part of the journey. It is part of our evolution. It is part of our soul's learning how, the soul already knows, but expressing itself so that our personality can let go of its stories and learn new truths and come home to deeper truths. All right. With that, I'm going to sign off. And if that resonated, give me a like. That would be great. Curious how many people go through your initiation processes. All right. Many blessings. Much love. Peace.